I rise to avail of the privileged hour to address a matter of profound importance, one that affects us as members of Congress, our constituents, and most especially the future generations of Filipinos who will inherit the consequences of our decisions today. The 2026 National Expenditure Program, or NEP, will soon be submitted to Congress for deliberations. But beforehand, I ask your indulgence to first examine significant provisions of the 2025 General Appropriations Act as approved by Congress, particularly when compared to the 2025 original budget document submitted by the President. I believe that certain adjustments made to the budget raise serious legal questions and may be vulnerable to constitutional challenge. I would like to share these observations with you, my esteemed colleagues, as this will hopefully guide us in the approaching deliberations on the 2026 national budget. Distinguished members of this chamber, last January, I exposed a glaring anomaly in the ratified Bicameral Conference Committee report on the 2025 General Appropriations Act, containing 28 blank items spanning 13 pages that were mysteriously filled in the enrolled bill and finally in the General Appropriations Act. I will present the full details of this controversy in a separate privileged speech. But today, I must draw your attention to another blatant irregularity in the 2025 budget that has escaped public scrutiny and was never openly deliberated by either the House or the Senate. I refer specifically to the automatic appropriations, which by their nature no longer require legislative enactment. My concern centers on the use of income in the general fund and the special accounts in the general fund. We are aware that the proposed 2025 National Expenditure Program, as proposed by the President to Congress way back in July 29, 2024, amounts to 6.352 trillion, which is sourced from program due appropriations of 4.247 trillion and automatic appropriations of 2.105 trillion. Can we request this slide projection? Wala bang PowerPoint? I think I have a PowerPoint. But kung wala, ihabol na lang. In addition, the President also proposed the amount of 158.67 billion in unprogrammed appropriations as standby authority to be released only when, number one, when revenue collections in any one of the identified non-tax revenue sources exceeds target as reflected in the budget of expenditures and sources of financing, or BESF. Number two, when new revenues from new tax and non-tax sources are collected, which are not part of or not included in the original revenue sources reflected in the BESF. Or three, approved loans for foreign assisted projects. In summary, the expenditure program of 6.352 trillion can be presented in a more detailed manner, taking into consideration the program and program new appropriations and components of the automatic appropriations. Wala pa rin project point, PowerPoint, so kung wala pa rin, let me proceed. Supposedly, may PowerPoint tayo. Yung new general appropriations, 4.405 trillion, composed of program appropriations of 4.2 trillion and program appropriations of 158 billion. Yung automatic appropriations is 2.1 trillion, and under the automatic appropriations are the retirement and life insurance premium, customs duties and taxes, the national tax allotment, interest tax on national government debts, farm block grants, pension of ex-presidents and spouses, net lending. At under automatic appropriations, nandito nakasulat ang special accounts in the general fund in the amount of 27 billion 352 million 123,000. Again, the program appropriations of 158 million yung billion yung submitted ng Presidente. Again, for a total expenditure program of 6.352 trillion. With that as a background, Mr. Speaker, I will now go to the main issue, which I want to emphasize having a great impact on the total expenditure program. As I have said earlier, I will no longer discuss the items under the program and program appropriations of the GAA, since it is the topic of another privileged speech or my next privileged speech. But I will discuss now the special accounts in the general fund, which are sourced from earmarked revenues of the government. What are earmarked revenues? Earmarked revenues are identified revenues required by statute to be used for designated activities, benefits, or purposes, and must be accounted for separately from the government's general revenues. For 2025, the earmarked revenues amount to 1.202 trillion and is classified into two categories. Number one, use of income in the general fund for a total amount of 1.175 trillion and special accounts in the general fund of 27.352 billion. To differentiate the two categories, the use of income in the general fund refers to revenues that accrue to the general fund, which by virtue of statutes or enabling laws authorize agencies to use part of the income of the general fund for a specific program or project, which are generally included in the program portion of the General Appropriations Act, except when it is specifically provided by law that it is automatically appropriated, like the case of the national tax allotment and the farm block grant. On the other hand, special accounts special accounts in the general fund, as mentioned earlier, are funds whereby proceeds from specific revenue measures are earmarked by law for specific priority programs and projects and are automatically appropriated. The details of the earmarked revenues are shown in Table B.15 or B.15, specifically on pages 413 to 420 of the 2025 BASF or Budget of Expenditures and Sources of Financing. supposedly summarized on the screen. So mahaba yan. On the use of income in the general fund, the amount of 1.175 trillion, while the special accounts in the general fund is the amount of 27.352 billion. How I wish we had the PowerPoint para madaling maintindihan. But let me continue. Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, may I mention the legal basis or the enabling laws that authorizes the setting aside of portions of the general fund and proceeds of specific revenue measures to ensure the funding of the programs and projects being implemented by the recipient departments and agencies. As shown in Table B.15 of the 2025 BESF, dahil wala tayo dito, the Table B.15 of the BESF can be seen at the website of the DBM. Hanapin nyo lang yung BESF, makikita nyo doon, Table B.15. The earmarked revenues usually comes from collections of previous years at any specified period indicated in the enabling laws. Considering that these earmarked revenues are subjected to the annual programming of expenditures, some of the funds will accumulate huge balances at the end of the fiscal year. For purposes of my speech, I am showing only the earmarked revenues for 2025 and those with available balances as of December 31, 2023 as reflected in Table B.15 of the 2025 BESF. So, dahil wala tayong PowerPoint, I'll just refer you to the DBM website. Now, I will focus my discussion on the special accounts in the general fund. What are special accounts, again, in the general fund? As part of the budgetary process, special accounts in the general fund and all the other automatic appropriations do not require any annual legislative action by Congress. However, any amendment or upward amendment to these accounts may directly or indirectly increase the total expenditure program submitted by the President of Congress. This could potentially violate the constitutional limitation on the appropriation of funds. To summarize, the special accounts in the general fund refers to the funds whereby proceeds from specific revenue measures are earmarked by law for specific priority programs and projects and forms part of the national expenditure program submitted by the President of Congress. SAGF are presented in the NEP or in the GAA in the form of special provisions which explicitly provides for the amount of program expenditures over and above the regular new appropriations of an agency. If the amounts in the special provisions are increased by Congress, there is a corresponding increase over and above the total expenditure program as submitted by the President to Congress. Throughout my 15 years of service in this House, the items classified under automatic appropriations have remained absolutely intact. These appropriations have been consistently recognized and respected by the House Committee on Appropriations, the Senate counterpart, and both chambers of Congress as legally mandated expenditures that are explicitly protected by their enabling laws. These automatic appropriations must not be subjected to alteration or amendment as they constitute non-discretionary obligations established by law. Their statutory protection ensures that these funds remain outside the purview of the annual appropriations process, preserving the legislative intent and maintaining the fiscal stability these mechanisms were designed to provide. However, for the first time in an unprecedented move, the 2025 budget reveals that the Bicameral Conference Committee has amended the automatic appropriations by making substantial upward adjustments in the special provisions of several agencies, with SAGF a staggering 12.75 billion increase that fundamentally undermines the protected status of automatic appropriations. This extraordinary breach has inflated the President's original submission from 27.352 billion to an unprecedented 40.107 billion, a shocking 47% increase that directly contravenes the statutory mandate of these appropriations. Such manipulations on the special accounts and general fund allocations set an extremely perilous precedent that threatens the very foundation of our budgetary framework and the rule of law that protects these funds from political interference. From the original proposal of 27.352 billion, the amount is raised to 40.107 billion. Madam Speaker, the BICAM adjustment of 12.75 billion will correspondingly increase the total expenditure program from 6.352 to 6.365 billion. Supposedly, meron tayong PowerPoint presentation. Wala. Based on the scrutiny, dahil wala tayong PowerPoint presentation, papakita ko lang at sasabihin ko na lang, babasahin ko na lang isa-isa. Based on my scrutiny, the BICAM made the following adjustments on the SAGF of the affected agencies. 1. ASEF, Agricultural Competitive Enhancement Fund, dinagdagan ng 274 billion. Remedies Fund, ASEF dinagdagan ng 274 million. Remedies Fund dinagdagan ng 28 million. Competitiveness Enhancement Measures Fund dinagdagan ng 1 billion. Fisheries Management Fund dinagdagan ng 13 million. Rewards and Incentives Fund dinagdagan ng 3.6 billion. Spectrum User Charge dinagdagan ng 5 billion. Fire Code Income dinagdagan ng 2.5 billion. Land Registration Fees and Collection dinagdagan ng 37 million. Other executive offices, the Dangerous Drug Board dinagdagan ng 20.95 million. National Endowment for Culture and the Arts, dinagdagan ng 75 million. Philippine Space Agency, dinagdagan ng 126 million. Yung Coconut Development Fund and Coconut Consumer Stabilization Fund, dinagdagan ng 65 million. Total increase of 12,754,670,000 sa automatic. What are the legal and constitutional violations demanding immediate resolution? Madam Speaker, the following critical constitutional questions must be urgently addressed as they strike at the very heart of our democratic budgetary process and threaten the integrity of future national appropriations. First, constitutional infirmity. Has the Bicameral Conference Committee, by unilaterally increasing SAGF by 12.7 billion, rendered the entire 2025 expenditure program constitutionally defective? This unprecedented manipulation raises the specter of a fundamentally flawed budget that violates Article 6, Section 25, Paragraph 1 of the Constitution, which explicitly prohibits Congress from increasing the appropriations submitted by the President. Second, fundamental breach. The core constitutional question that demands immediate clarity. Does Congress, through the BICAM, possess any legal authority whatsoever to inflate SAGF amounts, special accounts in the general fund amounts, beyond the actual program expenditure supported by their earmarked sources or earmarked revenues? This appears to be a direct violation of the established principles that special accounts in the general fund are by their very nature limited to their earmarked revenues and cannot be arbitrarily expanded beyond their statutory limitations. These are not mere technicalities. They are fundamental breaches of our constitutional architecture that could render the entire budget process null and void. The gravity of these violations cannot be overstated, as they threaten to establish a dangerous precedent where future Congresses might feel emboldened to disregard constitutional constraint with impunity. Mr. Speaker, as I mentioned earlier, Madam Speaker pala, as I mentioned earlier, the other category of the earmarked revenues is the use of income in the general fund, which by virtue of statutes or enabling laws authorizes agencies to use part of their income, the general fund, for a specific program or project which generally included in the program portion of the GAA. I want to bring to your attention that the BICAM amended the line item appropriation of the DPWH of the Special Road Fund, adjusting the net figure of 16.756 billion to 34.74 billion, or an increase of 17.992 billion. However, the amount in the special provisions is maintained at 16.75 billion. Hindi balanse. Pero in-increase yung line item appropriation in the DPWH of the Special Road Fund. The Special Road Fund is constituted from amounts collected by virtue of Republic Act 8794 as amended by Republic Act 11239, abolishing the road board and providing for the disposition of the motor vehicles user charge, which shall be automatically credited to a special account in the general fund of the National Treasury, constituted as a special road fund, and shall be earmarked for the construction, upgrading, repair, and rehabilitation of roads and bridges, road drainage to be included in the annual General Appropriations Act. It is explicit that Republic Act 11239. It is explicit that all monies collected under this act shall be remitted to the National Treasury under a special account in the General Fund, credited to the amount to the Special Road Fund. For 2025, the proposed revenue from the motor vehicles user charge tax collections, only the amount of 16.75 billion is programmed for expenditure in the 2025 National Expenditure Program. The BICAM added 17.992 billion to the 16 billion which was originally proposed in the NEP. But here's the problem. The 17.992 billion was not sourced from the available balance of the Special Road Fund, but from pooled sources of funds or cuts on realignments from other agencies. Pwede ba yun? Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, although the increase of 7.992 billion to the line item appropriation of the DPWH Special Road Fund will not increase the total expenditure program of the government, is it proper or legal to increase the Special Road Fund from funds coming from other sources in the GAA and not from earmarked revenues coming from the motor vehicles user charge? What are the legal and constitutional questions raised? The increase of 17.992 billion on the line item appropriations of the DPWH Special Road Fund was that sourced from the specific earmarked revenues stipulated by law or Republic Act 11239, which must come from the MBUC, but allegedly sourced from pooled or reallocated sources from other agencies. The main legal and procedural concern is whether Congress, through the BICAM, can increase the amount in the Special Road Fund beyond what is supported of program for expenditure from the earmarked revenues, and whether such increase source from other fund sources violate the enabling laws and constitutional budget process. The main issue here is, can the Special Road Fund be augmented from other sources of appropriations in the GAA? It is explicit in the law that the source of funds for the Special Road Fund shall come from the MBUC tax collection, which shall be remitted to the Bureau of Treasury under a special account in the general fund appropriated in the GAA. Is it right to assume that if the increases are not supported by actual collections from the designated revenue sources, or if they are, or if they alter the nature of the appropriations set by law, these adjustments may be legally questionable and vulnerable to constitutional challenge. Mr. Speaker, I was expecting that these congressional insertions in the SAGF will somehow be subjected to presidential veto because it bloated the expenditure program submitted by the President. Yes, I am aware that preconditions were included in the implementation of the special provision by subjecting it to judicious programming based on the actual collections and utilization of funds. But my point is, by increasing the amount in the special provisions of the SAGF, there is a corresponding increase in the expenditure program submitted by the President, which may breach the constitutional limitation in the appropriation of funds. Of the numerous provisions on SAGF amended by Congress, only the special provisions of the Bureau of Customs on rewards and incentives was conditionally vetoed. On the other hand, the Special Road Fund, which has substantially increased from 16.756 billion to 34.748 billion, was merely noted by the President under the General Observations portion of the veto message. If you can remember, the direct veto was only 26 billion for the DPWH and 168 billion in unprogrammed funds. Madam Speaker, I must now address a final matter that, while not technically classified under automatic appropriations, involve similarly protected earmarked funds, vital to our universal healthcare system. The syntax law explicitly mandates that portions of revenues from tobacco and sugar-sweetened beverages be earmarked for PhilHealth to fund healthcare services under Universal Healthcare Act. While these funds may not be formally designated as special accounts in the general fund, like this previously discussed, the law is very clear in requiring that earmarking for PhilHealth. These earmarked funds, by their very nature, must be used exclusively for their statutorily designated purpose, healthcare delivery for the Filipino people. Similar to the national tax allotment, this fund should be automatically and regularly included in the annual General Appropriations Act. However, in the 2025 budget, PhilHealth received zero allocation from these mandated earmarked funds. This zero allocation represents a clear failure to comply with both the syntax law and the Universal Health Care Act. Congress has not provided what is legally due to the Filipinos. Again, Congress has not legally provided what is legally due to the Filipino people under these laws. It is particularly troubling that even a token 1 peso budget could have saved PhilHealth's legal standing for augmentation purposes. Instead, the complete absence of allocation effectively prevents any possibility of funding restoration. Madam Speaker, this zero allocation for PhilHealth represents a serious departure from the state's obligation to fulfill the promise of universal health care for all Filipinos. This omission demands immediate rectification to honor our legal commitments and our moral duty to provide healthcare access to our citizens. The failure to allocate mandated earmarked funds to PhilHealth raises profound constitutional questions that merit careful examination. The 1987 Constitution explicitly enshrines health as a fundamental right. Article 2, Section 15 declares that the state shall protect and promote the right to health of the people, while Article 13, Section 11 mandates that the state shall adopt an integrated and comprehensive approach to health development which shall endeavor to make essential goods, health, and other social services available to the people at affordable cost. By withholding the statutorily mandated earmarked funds from PhilHealth, the government failed to fulfill its constitutional obligation to provide the health benefits guaranteed under the Republic Act 11223 or the Universal Health Care Act. This law was specifically enacted to ensure that all Filipinos are guaranteed equitable access to quality and affordable health care, goods, and services, and protected against financial risk. Pending judicial review, these constitutional concerns are not merely academic. Multiple petitions have been filed before the Supreme Court, challenging both the zero budget allocation for PhilHealth and the related transfer for PhilHealth Reserve Fund. The resolution of these cases will have far-reaching implications for the implementation of the universal health care and the protection of Filipinos' constitutional right to health. Mr. Speaker, Madam Speaker, Mr. Speaker, yes, Mr. Speaker, as we await the Supreme Court's guidance on this critical matter, we must recognize that the stakes could not be higher. The health, the well-being of every Filipino. Mr. Speaker, my dear colleagues, my dear Filipino countrymen watching this on live coverage, I rise today with a resolute heart to speak on our national budget, not as a ledger of pesos and centavos, but as a living promise we make to every Filipino who trusts government will safeguard their health, their dignity, and their hope. The numbers we debate are in truth the measure of our compassion, our dignity, our will, and the test of our constitutional duty. These items under the automatic appropriations, particularly the special accounts in the general fund and the use of income in the general fund, is a product of painstaking legislations passed in previous Congresses, fully debated by our illustrious predecessors in the four corners of this legislative hall. The Bicam has practically altered and superseded 13 Republic Acts or special laws, and to include the PhilHealth funds reduction, a total of 14 laws that earmark certain funds from sources already specified as a product of exhaustive debates in both the House and the Senate. The 14 special laws specified under the automatic appropriations, particularly special accounts in the general funds, and the utilization of income under the general fund that were altered and superseded by the GAA 2025 are as follows. Number 1, RA 111239 or the Special Road Fund. This act amended RA 8794 or the Motor Vehicles User Charge. Number 2, RA 8718, RA 9496, and RA 10848 or the Agricultural Competitiveness Fund, ASEP. Number 3, RA 8800, 8800, Remedies Fund or the Safeguard Measures Act. Number 4, RA 8800 again or the Competitiveness Enhanced Measures Fund of the Safeguard Measures Act. Number 5, RA 10654 or the Bureau of Fisheries and Aquatic Resources Fisheries Management Fund. Number 6, RA 9335 or Rewards and Incentive Funds of the Attrition Act of 2005. Number 7, RA 10929 or Spectrum Usage Fund of the Free Internet Access in Public Places. Number 8, RA 9514 or Bureau of Fire Protection Fire Code Income. 9, PD 1529 or Land Registration Fees and Collections. Number 10, RA 9165 or Dangerous Drugs Act. Number 11, RA 9356 or the National Endowment Fund for Culture and the Arts. Number 12, RA 11363 or the National Space Agency Act. Number 13, PD 1234, PD 1854, RA 11435 or Coconut Development Fund and the Coconut Consumer Stabilization Fund. And last but not least is number 14, the Sin Tax Law of 2012. This item may not be the list of SAGF or UIGF, but the law is clear that 80% of the incremental proceeds of the Sin Tax Law will go to universal health care. The central constitutional issue requiring urgent clarification is this. Does Congress, acting through the Bicameral Conference Committee, have any legal authority to increase the amounts allocated to the special accounts in the general fund beyond the actual program expenditures backed by their designated revenue sources? Such actions appear to contravene the well-established principle that SAGFs are intended to be strictly limited to their earmarked revenues and cannot be augmented arbitrarily beyond what is legally mandated. This is far from a procedural technicality. It strikes at the very core of our constitutional framework. These potential violations constitute serious breaches that could undermine the legitimacy of the entire budget process, potentially rendering it null and void. The implications are profound, as such precedents risk empowering future legislatures to disregard constitutional fiscal constraints with impunity. The Constitution vests in Congress the power of the purse, but more crucially, it requires us to exercise this power with faithfulness to existing statutes. The General Appropriations Act cannot amend or override special laws previously enacted by Congress. This disregard for sanctity of the law undermines not just legislative intent, but the very legitimacy of this institution, and exposes the budget to legal challenge and public condemnation. I call on this august chamber to restore the trust, the confidence, and the integrity of the entire budget process. As a former chairman of the House Committee on Appropriations, it hurts me when I heard these highly repeated comments branding the 2025 national budget as the most corrupt budget ever passed in the history of Philippine Congress. I urge my colleagues, let us not allow short-term expediency or political calculations to compromise the hard-won health rights of our people. Let us remember that the world looked upon us when this chamber passed the Sin Tax Law in 2012. It helped the country garner the first ever investment grade credit rating from international credit rating agencies. Humility aside, I was the main author of the Sin Tax Law of 2012 or Republic Act 10351. For the sake of every Filipino in need, for our duty to the Constitution, for the future of our children and our children's children, I respectfully appeal, let us act now to correct this injustice. Today we face a test whether we uphold these laws in the spirit in which they were crafted and the welfare of the Filipino nation. Let us never forget the power of the force is not ours to wield, but ours to safeguard for the people we serve. Let us wield not just authority, but compassion and justice, for that is the true spirit of public service. Thank you, and may God bless our deliberations and our nation. Daghan salamat. Mr. Speaker, if there's anybody in the hall who wants to ask question, I'm willing to reply for an interpellation.